All of Japan's current problems can be traced back to the 90s, you see. In the 1980s, Japan was on top of the world. It was a time period where the rise and growth of Japan was crazy. Japan was going through an economic miracle. In just 3 decades, Japan had gone from a relatively small agricultural country devastated by war to becoming the world's second biggest economy. Some were even discussing that maybe it had already passed America as the #1 economic power. Japan was beating the USA in tech, cars, and even video games. Japan's eventual surpassment of the US seemed inevitable. People gave Japan the nickname of the Tiger of Asia. This is why in 80s movies you always see Japanese people as the bad guys, and why the cyberpunk genre takes so much from Japanese culture and aesthetics, as it was created in this decade. But of course, we know this didn't happen. Japan didn't took the place of America as the ruling economy. Fast forward to the 1990s, and we discover that all this growth was mainly due to an economic bubble caused by the government and the housing market. Just in 1990, the Japanese economy went down by 43%, almost half of what it was just a year ago. People started calling Japan the crouching tiger, or the sleeping tiger of Asia. If you were someone who entered to work in a big company a year before, you were one of the lucky ones because, yeah, you would have to endure the high prices, the diminishing value of the yen, and of your house. But at least you had a paying job. Due to how Japanese laws work, they have this concept of a worker for life. In the majority of cases, it is literally impossible for the company to fire its employees. But that's not it. A lot of companies have one annual event where they will do all the hiring for that year, and they have the policy of just hiring people fresh out of university. This is why normal employees tend to stick with just one company their whole life, as it is very difficult to change the company that you work for. But due to the crisis, those companies weren't hiring, and this continued for almost the entire decade. When they started to hire again, they continued with their policy of just hiring people fresh out of university, because that way they could mold their minds to fit the company culture, and because it meant the workers would stay longer with the company. Because, as I said, due to the law, you will be stuck with them for life. So if you hire someone older, this means that worker will be working fewer years for you, because they will hit the age of retirement sooner. As a result, the people who were graduating from university suddenly found that they had a degree which was essentially worthless. They could do nothing with it because no one was hiring. By the time companies began to hire again, a lot of years had passed and many people were left out of the job market, leaving them with just part-time, informal, or temporary work. While no shade to those kinds of works, as they are as necessary and worthy as any other, they make it very difficult to plan ahead in life and do things like marrying, having kids, or buying a home. This event would later be known as the Lost Decade, and it was so bad that it is the culprit for making Japan the country with the biggest external debt in the world, said debt being 2 times bigger than all the money Japan produces in 1 year. Even to this day, more than 3 decades after the event happened, it is estimated that today, almost half of all Japanese employees work in a part-time, informal, or temporary work. But that's not all, because these people couldn't find a job that would leave them enough to make a living and buy a house, and in a lot of cases pay rent. They had to resort to living in manga cafes, a place where for a fee you could stay the whole day in a room of 4 by 7 meters, with the original idea that it would be a place to relax, use a computer, read manga for a few hours, and leave. But it has now become a place where thousands and maybe millions of people call home. I say maybe because the situation is so bad that the government is refusing to release the numbers. According to them, Japan, despite being one of the countries with the biggest populations in the world, having 125 million people, and the most populated city in the world, Tokyo, with more than 30 million people, only has 3,000 homeless people, less than 0.003% of the population, the lowest in the world. But again, that's not all, as due to some quirks about how Japanese society works, which I am not going to delve too much into. Again, I have the video Japan is a cyberpunk dystopia for that. A lot of people who didn't find jobs felt guilty and ashamed of themselves because, you know, Japan and the whole failing to do your duty thing. This pushed some to shut out the outside world and never leave their rooms, subsisting only on anime and video games to fill their fantasies, which will later be named the Hikikomori phenomenon. It is estimated that as of 2023, 1.46 million people of working age live in self-confinement, some having gone decades without literally putting a foot outside. This decade was defined by people feeling desperate and hopeless. That's why in the 1990s you get series like Neon Genesis Evangelion, Serial Experiments Lain, or Trigun that ended up feeling very depressing and were filled with feelings of loneliness and anger, because that's how the young people of Japan felt. And you know who is the best customer for a cult? Someone who feels lonely, hopeless, and depressed. If you know anything about Japan and cults in the 1990s, you probably know where I am going with this. On March 20th, 1995, in Tokyo, an attack on the Tokyo subway lines was carried out by the Aum Shinrikyo cult as a response to many criticisms made about them in the media and the discovery that a police raid of the group was scheduled for March 22nd. They released sarin gas, unaliving 13 people while severely injuring 50. And if you haven't caught it, this is where the 20th of 20th century boys really comes from, as that was the day the attacks occurred. It was an event that shook the relatively peaceful Japan with very low crime rates. To put it into perspective, to Japanese people at the time, it felt similar to what many people felt in the US during the event of the Twin Towers. That's why, in anime or video games like Persona 5, you see a lot of symbolism involving trains and subways subway stations. Because the train system in Japan is so good and cheap, and the fact that Tokyo was the most populated city in the world, having 33.5 million residents in 1995 plus people living around that city, a lot of people don't have a car because they don't need one. They go to work, on dates, to visit friends or family by train. Heck, the country is so safe and the train's so good that regular elementary school kids use them to go to school alone on a regular basis. A few moments ago, I lied, because this doesn't just apply to Tokyo, but to all of Japan. To Japanese people, it is very normal to take a train in the morning to go from Osaka to Kyoto, or from Tokyo to Nagoya, or any other city and return home at night just because you can. So a lot of life in Japan revolves around trains. That's why you can see them a lot in anime. So imagine if suddenly an activity that you normally do in your day-to-day life, without thinking, yeah, maybe for a leisure activity, but maybe because you have to do it, as you needed to do it to go to school and study and get a job, or provide for your family, suddenly becomes dangerous. But again, you still need to do it, as getting a car is not an option, as you probably don't have that money on hand because of the economic recession. You would feel scared, anxious. You would be thinking that every day could be your last, especially because they hadn't caught the ones who committed the attack. So it's very possible there could be another one. Yeah, that's traumatizing. That's why I made the comparison to the Twin Towers, in the same way that a lot of Americans didn't want to go out because they felt that a plane could fall on them at any time. The Japanese public felt the same way, and all this was on top of the death of the emperor and the lost decade.